Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new edition of the Art Business Podcast. And my guest today is Zein Khalifa. She's co-founder of a group called Tintera. It's actually the only private gallery in Egypt, in Africa, dedicated to fine art photography. As the gallery now begins to prepare to make its debut, very exciting, at 154, which is coming up in London at the end of what we always see as Frieze Week. I'll be going, make sure anyone in London should get tickets and be there. It's over the weekend of Frieze. And also the debut of your representation of Tintera Gallery at Paris Photo this autumn, fall. And Zein, I'm pleased to say, is a graduate of Sotheby's Institute of Art, where I'm program director in the MA in Art Business. But Zein was just talking to me and reminded me that I did some lectures once for her MA in Contemporary Art, where I was talking about art business. But she's also a graduate of the Sarah Lawrence College in New York. And I will put on the podcast links to Zain's LinkedIn and other relevant websites like Tintera. Okay, so you're very welcome, Zein. And my first question, which I'm sure all listeners are thinking, this is about photography. Uh, I guess I always have this issue with photography because my students often make the mistake, I believe, of talking about photographic art, and I say, well, look, someone is primarily an artist, and they just happen to use photography. But of course, we also have photographers and journalistic photography and documentary photography. So we might sort of discuss those differences
Absolutely.
as well. But I think what everyone wants to know is what first drew you to photography as both a personal and then eventually professional pursuit.
Well, first of all, thank you, David, for having me on this podcast. And it's nice to be reconnected to Sotheby's Institute. Like many people, I think photography was something that was, as a child, you're photographed. My father loved taking photographs of us all. And I was very drawn to the camera from a very young age. I have a picture of myself at age 4 with the camera, my father's camera. And I think I received my first camera at age 8 and was always taking photographs, as I guess many people do. And then, that continued until I went on to university. And at university was when I first started actually taking courses in photography. It was never something, it was just something I did by myself. I never really learned about it other than through books. At home, my father had a large collection of Time Life magazine books. And those were very influential because there was a lot of documentary photography in those. And I spent a lot of time looking at those images. And then when I went to college, that was my first introduction to actually studying photography. That went on to be, I took it up as a profession much later, actually, though. It was after university. I went back maybe 15 years later, and I worked as a portrait photographer for several years before starting the gallery. So in between, there's life happened in between.
Of course, as it does indeed. And
Yeah.
when you're talking about portrait photography, may I ask, did this begin with taking photos of friends and family, and they say you're quite good at this, or you thought you had something, a way of viewing the sitter that was different maybe from other photographers?
I think it came quite naturally to me. I could make what you would call a good picture, and I enjoyed that. And I would take pictures of everything, landscapes, people, wherever I was photographing. And that eventually then just evolved into when I had my own children, of course, photographing them. And that's how the sort of portrait photography business started, because I had my children taking pictures of them, and then other people asking for me to take pictures of their own children, and it continued from there.
It spirals from there. It's
Yeah.
very interesting the way these things can develop. And another question is obviously analog photography using old-fashioned black and white film, color slides, color transparencies, digital. Could you say a little bit about the development in your use of photography about the media you were using?
Well, when I studied at university, it was all analog. And so we were very much in the dark room, learning all about the process in that way. When I went back to it professionally, we were just on the cusp of turning to digital. So I had to sort of relearn everything digitally. But because I had the foundations of analog, it was perhaps a little easier for me to understand what the camera is trying to do, what you're supposed to do, in Photoshop, what it is you're trying to do in the darkroom, then translating that digitally. So although it was a lot to take in and having to sort of relearn everything again, I think you sort of know what it is you're trying to do. With a lot of people, I think a lot of people digitally don't really understand how a camera works, or they understand it in a different way. So
Maybe they don't use manual overrides because that they get panicked by that.
yeah, so yeah, it's quite a different world.
I'm sure that you do as well. And what about paper? And when you're developing black and white photographs, I remember I did a little bit of this myself, and it was wonderful experimenting with as artists. Artists using paint and pencil. You're experimenting with different canvases, and the artist Georgia Dimmock that was on my previous podcast. She was using linen at the moment and telling me about how different that feels physically and how different it looks in the end. So, could you say something about paper, how important that is to you?
Well, I mean, I would say it was important to me at the time that I was working in the darkroom. I mean, that
Yeah.
was mostly as a student. After that, I really didn't go back into the darkroom, and I moved back to Cairo, and I didn't have a darkroom, and that was frustrating. Um, in that way, I was happy for digital because suddenly you have a digital darkroom, which is easier to use. And so um, I wasn't experimenting in the same way with paper and processes and different printing techniques. Now I'm happy when the artists that we work with at Tintera do that, because it's nice to see them do that. Me personally, I'm not doing that anymore, but it's and it's very important to print on different papers because each one adds something completely different to the work. And we encourage as much as we can in Egypt, where we're perhaps a bit limited with the materials we have. We try to encourage artists to try, different ways of printing and presenting.
Yes, and I think that if I may say, the younger generation. I have a student this year, and he turns up with these amazing vintage cameras, and he takes the most beautiful sort of black and white photographs. He's still very much enjoying. I think that younger generation have almost gone back to analog. Many of them, like
Yes,
vinyl records and old cameras
yes,
and so on.
yes, absolutely.
So we'll probably come back to that in the course of the conversation. How did your what were you studying at Sarah Lawrence before we talk about your postgraduate studies?
Well, Sarah Lawrence it's in America, in New York. It's a liberal arts program, but what we don't have majors, but we have concentrations, and my concentration was photography. I
Mhm.
didn't know it was something you could study at school. I didn't go to study that. But when I was there, I was my first week, my advisor said, we have a very strong photography program run by a very prominent American photographer. You might consider trying to get into his class. And the photographer is Joel Sternfeld, one of the great American photographers. And I was very pleased that I got in because I loved photography, but also it opened up a completely new, door for me, to be able to spend time doing something that I really enjoyed. And so that was the studies. That was the Sarah Lawrence studies, with photography, and then I went on much later to do continue my studies at Sotheby's, which was the
Sotheby's
history.
Institute of Art in London, not New York, and
Yes, exactly.
and and you opted for the master's degree in contemporary art. I think
No,
Julia.
and it was photography at the time.
Oh, really?
Yes,
But of course, yes.
it was a
Um,
history of photography.
that's right, because Juliet, of course, is Juliet Hacking, my esteemed colleague, who's
Yes,
now program director of the MA in Contemporary Art, originally was working in photography at Sotheby's and then moved into back into academia, and it was a photography course. Of course, now I remember. And I guess the question may be about all of that undergraduate and postgraduate education. did it shape your, because we're going to talk about you as a curator in Tintera, as we've been talking to you as a photographer, but did it shape your curatorial approach? Did you begin to think about curation?
Well, I will say I wouldn't really use the word curator for myself at the gallery. I mean, I have a gallery and we put on shows, but I
Yes.
haven't really curated things outside of the gallery so much. So, but what I did learn in both at Sarah Lawrence, it was a great introduction to photography, really mostly in America. So I had a good background in what was going on in America in the 40s and the 50s. And then while I was studying, which was in the mid 80s, it was a great transformation with people like, Nan Golden and Barbara Kruger and my own teachers, Joel Sternfeld and Susan Jehoda. These were people who were really sort of suddenly breaking the mold that was there already, and we had the new photography being presented. So I think that was a very exciting time to be there. So that, of course, you absorb that, and you take it in you. And then when I went on to study at Sotheby's, what Juliet is brilliant at doing is that she can give you the whole history of photography. And of course, you choose what you want to focus on. But it really, for me, it sort of linked a lot of things that had been missing. I mean, I knew certain parts of it, but the thread was pulled through. And you look at photography from so many different facets, from it being a tool of reproduction to a fine art, wearing all of these different hats. Is it documentary? Is it truth? Is it, all sorts of things. So that was very important, and that came at a good time. And I think combining those two, I think, sort of prepared me to be able to understand the artists who come to us in the gallery. And so you're able to see it from different angles.
Yeah, and in the early millennium, when I was at the Institute teaching art business, very exciting time, of course, for we witnessed, particularly in London, the growth of interest in contemporary art, and the market for contemporary art began to boom exponentially. Suddenly, Tate Modern had opened in 2000.
Right.
Everybody was going, all ages were going now, and that didn't used to be the case in the
Yeah.
old millennium at all. And I remember photography suddenly, because of the digital revolution, if I can call it that, where you get much, much higher, increasingly higher resolution possible, we begin to get artists like Andreas Gursky who are realizing he can compete with large oil
Yes.
canvas paintings, history paintings, by creating photographs which have a similar kind of presence on the wall. And I just wonder what's your attitude towards the what we might call art that happens to use photography. People like Gursky. Do you like that sort of photography as well as the photography you're involved in?
Yes, I absolutely. I mean, I love that kind of work, and it's important to understand why that happened at the time that it happened, and the competition with painting with the art world. So that's always important to know how there's always this sort of, the two of them competing with one another. Um, yeah. Sorry, I'm forgetting what the question
Well,
you're
it
saying.
wasn't actually, the more I think about it, the more I think it wasn't in some ways I was just making a comment about that, about
Yeah.
some, and I think the reason I was making the comment is because in whatever any other person using photography was doing, it certainly became a new dimension, and it certainly made me rethink photography. And then I was going to exhibitions of more vintage photography, like your Nan Goldins and your Tutor and so on. What I was going to come back to actually, Zane, is when you were in New York studying, do you remember going to exhibitions that were only photography? In gallery?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I remember New York had a lot of photography galleries. And in fact, the galleries that I used to go visit are kind of we've modeled Tintera on that in many ways. In that, I remember the galleries were not, many of them were not on street level. They were always, you'd have to go into a building, go up many flights of stairs. And then you'd enter sort of a small sort of studio space where you'd have drawers full of images, and people would bring out prints and you'd see them. And it was much more informal and maybe more welcoming than perhaps a big glitzy contemporary art gallery. And so when with Tintera, we're on the second floor of a residential building, and we have a room where we have lots of drawers with lots of images, with lots of prints. Some of them just exhibition prints, and some of them, prints to buy, finished prints. And we like people to sort of explore and open drawers and open portfolio boxes and ask questions. So I remember how exciting that was when I was in New York. And so I hope that we're able to sort of offer that same excitement, that same sense of discovery, that it's not something just framed on the wall, that it's something that you can, delve into and find your own artists that you like, and ask questions about them.
Do people have to make appointments to visit Tintera?
No, we're actually open. We're open at all times. People can pop in.
Mhm.
But it's also the sense that we're not on the street. The streets of Cairo are very busy. And it's if you're able to find us and make your way up to the second floor, it's a nice little oasis that awaits you.
That sound. I hope I can.
I
I
hope
wish
so.
I could, but I hope I can. So, what did you learn from your time at Hackleberry Fine Arts that informs your work today? And maybe you could explain to listeners what Hackleberry Fine Arts is.
So Hackleberry Fine Arts is a gallery, a photography gallery in London, in South Kensington, and which I uh, had the pleasure of working there for a few years. And they're wonderful, wonderful small gallery with great artists. We worked with people like William Klein and Gary Fabian Miller and Doug and Mike Starn and Saul Leiter. And for me, that was a great introduction to how a gallery really operates. And it's something a lot of people don't really see, sort of the back room of a gallery, and how busy it really is. You always walk into these spaces and you just see these beautiful, calm rooms with pictures, and you just think, oh, this is easy peasy. And then you understand all the sort of the machine that's working there. So, and I got to travel. I got to meet a lot of artists, which I was very happy to meet. And we did a lot of studio visits, and we went to a lot of fairs. So I got a good sort of experience in working at big international art fairs, which was really great. A very good experience, and they're a lovely team there at
Sounds
Hackleberry.
sounds great. So then, what inspired you and Heba Farid, I hope I'm pronouncing your names correctly, to co-found Tintera?
Yeah, so Heba Farid is a co-founder along with me. Heba was working in Egypt in the photography world, and I had been based in London, but I was starting to go back to Cairo and wanting to do something. I was thinking, I can't just stay here in London. I just couldn't find. I didn't understand. I thought there's something more I could do, and so going back to Egypt, I was thinking, where's the photography world? Where do these images sit? You see them, but where do they sit? What's going on? Who's preserving them? We don't really have a museum of photography in Egypt. It's not regarded. People don't understand it so much. So Heb and I, it was over quite a number of years. We're talking about different projects to do, and then finally, a space was made available to us in which we said, let's just have a space and just invite people and see what happens. We didn't think it was going to necessarily be a gallery. And but the moment we started getting people in and getting pictures on the wall, we realized that there was a market. And I think it was very good timing. I think people were just ready at that point to start engaging. I think, as you said, photography abroad had, it became a thing. People were going to Tate Modern. People were beginning to see photography shows, the Photographers Gallery, ICP, big museums of photography all over the world. So I think that sort of informed people. It was like, oh, photography is something, we should be looking at. So that's really how it started about, in 2019.
And the art world is so full of those stories of what I call serendipity, that you just do something. And I often say to my students, go back, get away from the rationality that you've been taught in art history, and go back to the passion for art and relying on your instincts. They lead you places, and they lead you
Yeah.
to partnerships and new audiences. And if you're not open to that, as artists are, obviously, I mean that's
Yeah.
what makes them artists. It's one of the things that defines an artist, that they're deliberately open and vulnerable to everything that's going around, so they see things ahead of the rest of us. That's one of my definitions. So yeah, and you can see that that's happening in your world.
Mm.
So the next question, really, you were talking about photography, the status of photography in Egypt, and you suddenly realized, there wasn't much of an understanding of why should photography be in a gallery. Once you frame anything in a gallery, it becomes art or becomes something different. But I was going to ask you, why focus exclusively on photography in Cairo and Egypt? And you've already said a little bit about the gaps you were aiming to fill with Heber.
Mm. Well, we decided to focus on Egypt because, well, first, there isn't a photography gallery, gallery dedicated to photography in Egypt. So we really first thought, okay, we both come from a background of photography, so this is what we're going to do. And then we thought Egypt because we wanted people to respond. I mean, we people in Egypt were not used to buying photographs, but maybe if there were photographs of Egypt, maybe it was something closer to them. Or photographs made by Egyptian artists, they might feel more compelled to do so. And that was really one of the main reasons. Another main reason was to support the photographers in Egypt who didn't have a space to exhibit. And I think both Hiba and I had, worked as, as photographers. And I think perhaps we were a bit also frustrated that we didn't have places that could have supported us so much. I mean, there was, for many years, there was Townhouse Gallery that showed photography, but they closed. And so they closed around the time of the Arab Spring. And so after that, there really was a gap. There was no space for showing photography. So I think this is where we came in, and we thought we'd start with Egypt. I mean, it's not exclusively Egypt, but right now this is what we're doing: encouraging photographers who live there, whose work references Egypt, and photographers who are Egyptian and maybe who live abroad but want to come back and show their work to a local audience.
Yeah, and I mean, when you say Egyptian photography, when you say Egypt to me, actually, I, I think of I think of very old photographs of the pyramid and the Sphinx. It's very photogenic, for whatever reason. And I think you're also talking about taking genre photographs of just everyday people and places in the urban places like Cairo. Was your interest fairly broad, or was what were the subjects that people seemed to be
We,
interested in who were coming into your gallery?
we wanted to show, of course, that those are the images when you're talking about sort of 19th century images of
Yeah,
Egypt. That's what
exactly.
That's
Romantic.
what we're all familiar with here, actually, in the West more so. In
Hmm.
Egypt, people are less familiar with those images
How
because
interesting.
while they may have been made in Egypt, they were made for a Western audience. They were made as souvenirs to take away from your travels there. So
Hmm.
a lot of people in Egypt might not necessarily be as familiar with those as we are here. You go here to the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert, you see those images. So we wanted to show a more sort of modern, the difference, a more modern Egypt, and or to challenge that representation. Are we really only pyramids in the Nile? Do you know Egypt? Do you know Cairo is a modern city? Do you know do you know the sort of the issues that people are working with, the struggles? I mean, so this is why we wanted to sort of challenge that perception a little bit. And that
Yeah.
those are the photographers that we have, who they're all challenge it in different ways.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And it's to do with the whole history of exoticism and Orientalism,
Absolutely.
Western viewers. And so it's great to hear that you're spearheading that and getting away from the stereotypes. And maybe you could tell us about the significance of the term Tintera. It's a wonderful gallery name. And how maybe does it reflect a curatorial philosophy?
Well, it does actually, because it's from the Tintera is from the word Dendera, which is an ancient Egyptian town in Upper Egypt, just outside of Luxor. And of course, when the early 19th, when the early photographers came in the 19th century, what were they photographing? The great temples in ancient Egypt. And so it's sort of a nod to that. That's what really brought them, and the idea that people came to Egypt because of not only the ancient temples, but the sunlight. Sunlight, we needed light to facilitate making photographs. So in this particular temple, there is a sort of symbolism to the idea of the sun casting its rays. So on one hand, it's that, and then the idea of being called Tintera, it sounded photographic, and it's a sort of tint era, and it's also an easy name to pronounce in both English and in Arabic.
Is that and memorable? It's a
Yes.
wonderful name. So the next, yes. So how do you how do you select artists to work with? And I'm sure you're going to say that it works in various ways. We're very interested to hear that. And what role does Egypt play in your artist's work?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because there is no particular the way that we select artists. I mean, I think we come across work, and I think we sort of we recognize, we see something in the work that is recognizable. To be able to identify it immediately, it's not so easy. It's just something that you go, oh, that works, that is good. You know, what else has this artist done? And so we start exploring to see, you know, how much work are they committed to this? Do they want to be artists? You know, so that's what we're looking for. And the way Egypt plays, it's very loose. You know, Egypt can be there, you know, physically you can see it in the image, or not at all, but maybe they're working and making this work in Egypt, and that's how Egypt plays a role.
And are they the artists that you're interested in for whatever reasons, are they, do you then, when you talk to them, do you find that they've been to art college? Where or are they self-taught or a mixture? Could you say something about some of their backgrounds?
A great mixture. We have a lot of artists who are international artists from America, Russia, France, who have lived in Egypt for several years. And they would have come from a more traditional sort of arts education, and they happen to be making their work in Egypt, or happen to live there now. And we have younger artists. Some of them don't even have cameras, but they're making photo-based art. Some of them are extremely, I mean, totally self-taught. They're using their iPhones. Some of them are using images that they find. So it's a quite a, you know, vast range.
And
Yeah. So
obviously, there are purists in photography who, the moment you say, "Oh, these people are using their iPhones," they would quake and say, "You can't use an iPhone to photograph." What do you think about that?
well, it's interesting because one of the artists that we are showing at 154 uses his iPhone, and he didn't have anything other than an iPhone. He's self-taught, and he produced, you know, lots of images with the iPhone. When he was finally given a camera, he found it very problematic because using a camera in Egypt comes with issues. It's not easy. You know, if you pull out a camera in a public space in Egypt, you attract attention,
Mm.
and so it maybe sometimes the iPhone is the right thing to use. Maybe everybody has an iPhone now. Everybody's using their phones to take pictures. Um, but a camera with a tripod looks a little bit more threatening and
And
holds
particularly
yes, and it holds a lot more power. So people question it. So you're not able to use it as easily.
No, I'm
Yeah.
sorry I interrupted then. I was getting excited because when you think, yeah, I mean, everybody used to have cameras, like tourists in
Yes.
London. I suddenly realized my camera, I haven't got out for 20 years because I'm just using my iPhone because it seems to have got more. And then it's quite unusual to see a student coming along with a camera. As you say, it kind of stands out for all sorts of reasons. And so the next question, I guess, is what trends are you seeing amongst Egyptian collectors and institutions? And in some ways, that's a kind of general question about the art world in Cairo and the rest of Egypt. Any kind of trends particular to Egypt?
Well, first, we don't have institutions that collect photography in Egypt. So while there might be some, you know, there are photographs, of course, in the museums, there nobody's acquiring new work right now. So in terms of collectors, I would say the trend is that they're beginning to look at photography, and they're beginning to actually put it in their living rooms, or, you know, wherever they want to put it in their homes. So that is that's a start. I mean, I think, and I don't know if there's something specific they're looking for. They love, and most people are going for landscapes. I don't think figurative work is still very strong in Egypt. So there's a lot of landscape photography or abstract photography that people are drawn to.
No, that's very interesting to know. And how do you support artists in navigating both those local, just in Cairo or in the region of Cairo, both local and one day international markets? Do you do you try to support them and try to get them represented in internationally as well? And obviously, you're coming to do these art fairs in Paris and London.
Absolutely. I think that's really what we are trying to do. And I think the fact that, you know, Heba is in Cairo in the gallery, and I'm there probably, 2/3 of the time, but, the rest of the time I'm abroad trying to make those connections with the outside world, trying to get museums here or in America or in Europe to look at us, try to get into fairs, try to connect the artists with the outside world. And I think that's what our role is as a gallery. So, I mean, other than just selling their work, we're there to help them make those connections. Without that, I don't think it's very easy for them to continue. They need to have that support. We don't have that in Egypt, so we need to look beyond that. Um,
Yes, and in many ways that fits into the whole strategy of 154. uh,
yes,
which was born from that idea that, and the name of the fair is so wonderful, because I often say to my students, you talk of Africa, how many nations are there in Africa? And when we were at the Venice Biennale last year, I was asking them, do you know how many nations there are in Latin America? You talk about Latin America. So 154, it was a great name, and you're part of that strategy, I guess, to be shown in um, more established, if you like, art centers of the north and the west.
I think an art fair as a 154 not only helps us to connect with people in London or New York, but also with other people in Africa, other the art scene there. We don't really connect. Egypt, we hardly have connections with the rest of the continent in terms of cultural exchange, and I think we want to, our artists want to, and there's a lot going on. And so I think a fair like this brings us together in a way that we're not brought together maybe on the continent so much. So it's
Yeah.
exciting to meet other gallerists and other artists from the region.
Yeah, no, I noticed that actually when I go there, that people, that the galleries, and perhaps more than other fairs, are like Frieze, which is the same week. They're really going around talking to one another. There's a
Yes.
lot of interaction, a lot of joy as well. I
Yes.
noticed.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you can give this away, but could you say something about, what I did mean to say, of course, and the 154 obviously began in Morocco in
Yes.
North, and then went to London. So that in itself is interesting. So could you say something about do you have any plans of what you'll be showcasing at 154 and Paris Photo? And are they going to look very similar, or would you recommend, if people like your stuff in London, that you go to Paris Photo and see some different stuff?
There'll be completely different presentations. At 154, we're showing two artists, Ibrahim Ahmed and Hashim Nasr.
Mhm.
Ibrahim's from Egypt, Hashim is from Sudan. And, just visually, you're going to have on one side black and white photo collage work by Ibrahim, and on the other side, these very colorful, almost surreal-like images of characters dressed up. Yeah, I would say quite surreal, but both dealing with very similar topics. We're looking at masculinity, gender, exile. So, but in sort of two different approaches. So I think they're going to make a good pairing, and so that's 154. In Paris, we'll be showing the work of a French artist who lived in Egypt for over 40 years, Bernard Guillot. He sadly passed away a few years ago, but we had worked with him in Cairo, and we were working on one of his what ended up being one of his last projects, which was a book on the City of the Dead in Cairo. The City of the Dead is a large sort of several cemeteries put together. It's very it's a UNESCO heritage site. It's beautiful old mausoleums, and Bernard photographed this place for the 40 years that he was there, and he put a book together. And so at Paris Photo, we're going to be showing the images from that book. The book only came out last November, so this will be the first time that the images from the book will be exhibited. And I think they're vintage prints, all hand printed by Bernard, black and white. Some of them are hand painted. So they're completely different feel to 154.
And it's really quite an interesting marketing strategy that a book comes out, sort of popularizes is a relatively inexpensive way of getting all those artist photos. But you can own one of these if you like the book and the work in the book enough. You can actually have one of these on your wall, one of the original prints.
And the book itself it's just beautiful. It's sort of almost handcrafted. It is.
Will you also be retailing the book at Paris Photo?
It's not our book to sell. It will be there, and the publishers are from Italy, and yeah, they will be there to promote the book.
Yeah, interesting sort of sharing of business as well.
Yes.
So we kind of talked a little bit about this, but I was going to ask you, what are the challenges of presenting Egyptian work as a nationality, if you like, to international audiences? Are there any particular challenges?
No, I think it's just kind of trying to contextualize the work and to help people understand, that if you have a preconceived idea of what Egypt is, sort of to challenge that and explain what's going on there for people to understand it. And also sometimes it's what are the limitations of so it's just about, sorry, I just blanked on something there. Trying to explain Egyptian photography. Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of to contextualize it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a silly question, actually.
Yeah.
The other thing is, of course, I'm constantly telling my students that most artists I speak to now, you can't tell what nationality their work is by looking at the work. Very often you can't tell what their gender, sexuality, or age is either. And I think a lot of contemporary artists, be they photographers, painters, sculptors, or whatever, textile, they're almost kind of become nomadic, global.
Maybe I would say I don't think any of our artists would say that they are Egyptian photographers.
Yeah.
I'm to use that label. So there is no school of Egyptian photography. It's so they just all happen to be practicing there, or maybe their work is referencing it.
Yeah. So the next question segues on quite nicely from that,
Yes.
because it may be a blank answer, but does Tintera have any role in, would you say, in preserving Egypt's photographic legacy, or is it all about photography now?
No, I hope it does have a role. I mean, I think I'm hoping that what's taking place now will be part of Egypt's photographic legacy. And the fact that we know there is a gallery, and the fact that today we are we're leaving a footprint of these shows, the exhibitions that we put on, we write texts, we print brochures, and we document what takes place so that the next generation can look back, learn from this. I mean, what we have in Egypt is that there is a photographic history, but there is very little documentation of what happened. Of course, there were exhibitions in the 70s and 80s, but very little of that really remains. So this is what we're trying to do with our photographers now, and by trying to do research on shows that might have taken place in the past, or photographers, who worked in the past, to try to bring them out. And I think that's.
There was a fantastic exhibition that I took my students to last year in St. Ives, the art colony in Cornwall, where there's a Tate. The special exhibition was about Morocco and the art movement and revolutions of art in the 60s and 70s, and the research that had gone in and the images that they uncovered. I suspect that if anyone had the time and energy to do it in Egypt, you could probably produce a similar exhibition.
I think a lot of people now are beginning to look at that, and I think there's a great interest now in photography in Egypt, and people are beginning to look at archives and studios and collections in a way that they weren't before. So I think there'll be lots of good things coming out.
Keep your eyes on that space. So,
Yes.
just asking you to be even more altruistic. You represent all these artists. What advice would you give to emerging curators or gallerists in the region, in Cairo, for example?
Hmm.
If someone said to you at a dinner party, "Oh, I'm really interested in art, and I've got a bit of capital. I'd quite like to open a gallery." I mean, is that easy to do in Cairo, or what advice would you give them?
Well, I think it's easier in Cairo, perhaps, on many levels than it is here. I think it's perhaps more affordable in terms of property and having a space. But I also think maybe Egypt may you could do something completely new. You don't have to. I think for us, being the only photography galleries, that gave us a lot of freedom. That we weren't on anybody's sort of schedule. We showed when we wanted to show, who we wanted to show, and in the way we wanted to. And so that is kind of fun. And I think it's okay to sort of be quite original in that way. And I think I would say for any other gallerist opening up, you don't have to be too conventional. Our gallery is in an apartment. It's a residential space. It's not your typical gallery
Yeah.
space. So and gallery can be many different things. I think you can break the mold a bit.
And how would you make the public, how would you market it? How would you make your public aware? The kind of people that are likely to come in and be interested and perhaps purchase. How do you do that?
Well, that's just what we do. We do fairs for that. We
Yes.
do outreach as much as possible, social media. It's a lot. You spend a lot of time communicating with people, a lot of time,
Yeah.
constantly trying to be visible and magnify or the space. Let people know about.
As you're about to do, obviously, in London and Paris. And so you would say that good old-fashioned in-person networking remains important in your art world.
Very important, especially in a place like Egypt. I think it is a lot of it's who you know and who you can talk to and who you can really sort of handhold and bring into the gallery. And I think that's how it works. And then you hope that, word of mouth, that it
And,
spreads.
and pardon my ignorance, but we're always talking to our students about the importance of getting an artist's work into a validating, public, apparently objective museum collection. Are there such places in Cairo?
No, in Cairo, there are no museums that we would look to see whether our artist is there or not.
Mhm.
Um, But of course, if the work is acquired by an institution abroad, that holds, of course, people would listen. And we have been very lucky. We've had a lot of people coming from abroad. We've had all the major museums come through the doors, and I think that's been wonderful. I mean, so it's lovely to have them there and to introduce them. And they've all been very surprised, very happily surprised by what we're doing.
That's a
Yeah.
sign of success to have all the major museums coming to you.
Yeah.
Uh, sounds like TFAF, the European Fine Art Fair, where gallerists fly in from all over the world.
Well, I think also Egypt is a place that people like to go visit. If so while they're there, we grab them. If we know somebody's in town, and we try to bring them in. And so this is how if you stay connected and kind of find out who's traveling, who's coming, and then you bring them into the space, and that's really nice.
That's great. So, what's next for you and for Tintera after Paris Photo?
Well, we have we have a very busy fall season. We're also showing in Venice at the Fortuny Museum. There is a 19th century show on Egypt on the photographer Antonio Beato, and alongside we have a contemporary display of photography from Egypt, and the museum has chosen to work with us. So we have four of our artists exhibiting there, which is extremely exciting. We also have Ibrahim Ahmed has a solo show in Australia, which we are helping him. We helped organize, and so it's wonderful that his work is going to be seen all the way there. Again, it's great that you know he's able to do that. And then after Christmas, we start with we have also another show opening up in the gallery in Cairo, a solo show by Lara Beladi, a Lebanese Egyptian photographer, and then a lot more coming in the spring. So there's a lot of work.
But you obviously enjoy it, Zane. So I'd just like to finish by thanking you for your enthusiasm on behalf of all the listeners all over the world, and just telling people that if they're in London or Paris, do go to Zane's Tintera gallery, and if you're in Paris for Paris Photo, go along, and I'm sure that you don't mind people saying hello to
Oh,
you.
absolutely. I love it when people come and say hello.
And I hopefully will see you myself in at 154 when I come down.
Okay,
Thank you
I'd
so
love to.
much.
Thank you very much, David. Pleasure.